a great pleasure to welcome you to CUTS Adda. And in this program, that what we've been trying to achieve is to have discussions with persons who are engaged and involved professionally in policymaking, specifically on the bilateral front. And so let me begin by not only welcoming you, wishing you and your family a very happy new year, and also congratulating you for the release, the launch of the much delayed, long awaited Australia economic strategy. So welcome, Ambassador Wadhwa.
Thank you very much, Amit, and I'm personally very delighted to speak to you today. And really delighted that the Australia Economic Strategy report, which you said has been delayed, I agree with that. But, I've been working on this report now along with CI and KPMG over the past almost 2 years. And this was finally released on the 18th of November. It was good that Minister Piyush Goyal and Simon Birmingham were there in the virtual participation, along with a large number of stakeholders in the Australia-India relationship. So it was a very substantial event from that perspective. And I'm glad that this report, which has been prepared as a response to Australia's India Economic Strategy Report 2035, which was released way back in 2018, has finally come out. And during the preparation of this report, we engaged with hundreds of stakeholders in India and in Australia across various cities and businesses, think tanks, states, government ministries, and universities. I'm glad that it's finally out there. And both these reports, I'm certain, would complement each other.
Thank you, Anil. I wanted to ask, there are lots of reports that keep coming out on how relationships need to be taken forward. And they are important because they are pointers, they sort of identify a pathway, they identify milestones, but the more critical aspect really is how we implement a report. So I wanted to ask you that now that we have these two important and I'd say landmark documents on trade relations between India and Australia, how do you feel they need to be implemented to try and ensure that we actually achieve what we have in mind? And which would you feel should be some of the key sectors that we take up over the next couple of years?
That's a very pertinent question, Amit, and I was acutely aware of this aspect when we were preparing the report, because a report should be one which needs an implementation strategy. So we've taken care to devote a whole chapter on the implementation strategies for this report. Now, before I come to that, let me just broadly mention that the Australia Economic Strategy Report has identified 12 key sectors. So that is mining, services and startups, pharmaceuticals, healthcare and medical technologies, education and skills, agribusiness, infrastructure, power and renewable energy, railways, gems and jewelry, automotive spare parts, and tourism. And these are the areas where there's actually ongoing cooperation. But then this report also looks at the future and highlights opportunities in emerging areas, which include labor-intensive services, defense, sports, textiles and textile designing, digital gaming and animation, water management and commercial ferries, shipbuilding, space and education technologies, all of which are expected to gain increased relevance in the future. So I believe a number of follow-up steps are now necessary. First, under the direction and the supervision of the two ministers of Commerce and Industry and Trade, both sides need to form a special working group, which will be composed of officials from their foreign ministries and any other ministry or organization, which includes business as is deemed fit, which will then review the implementation of these two reports together on a 6 monthly basis. So that's what the first recommendation in this report. This will allow for discussions on removing trade and investment barriers, facilitating businesses in engaging with each other, which cuts across federal and state levels, as well as across different ministries. And this will also include looking at issues like easing of visas and other consular issues, taxation, banking, phytosanitary, and other regulatory barriers. Second, on its part, the department concerned in both India and Australia must keep up their commitment and they must remain supportive, setting aside requisite funds which will allow for the dissemination of information and contents in the reports. The Australia Economic Strategy Report contains, for example, several pointed recommendations which also need to be implemented by various ministries in India. So that will have to be done by the nodal department. In our case, it is the Department for Industrial Policy and Promotion. And third, India and Australia should seriously look at their free trade agreement negotiation, which was stalled due to RCEP, as we know. There's a lot to gain for both sides if this comes about quickly, and also this will help them align their resilient supply chains initiative, which they've undertaken with Japan. So that's another recommendation in this report. Fourthly, I believe big businesses on both sides must get interested in each other and also explore the investment route, which will then drive trade. So the business-to-business linkages need strengthening because we will need more meetings, obviously, between different trade bodies and associations. And also these must be sector-specific now because the recommendations are all there. And specialized business talks. We have a CEOs forum between the two countries, and now that has not met for many months. That must be revived with the right partnership and specific working groups to carry out work during the intersessional period. And they have to come out with their own recommendations so that there is a follow-up for the businesses to do. Fifthly, this report recommends that on the lines of the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund, the two sides should start a joint startup and innovation fund, as well as a humanities and social sciences collaboration fund, both with a very modest contribution, which we recommended of 10 million US dollars by each side over 5 years for each party. So what will happen is that once you get this going, then obviously it will have its own momentum because during the course of preparing this report, we found that there was a great chemistry which existed already in the innovation and the startup space between different. Sixthly, once the pandemic eases, both sides should seriously work towards starting direct flights between some major hubs. That is a major lacuna in this relationship because unless you have businesses being facilitated by direct linkages, they have to go via countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, etc. right now. And that's a little inconvenient for businesses to meet. That would help a lot in furthering the trade and investment relations. Sixth, I believe, both sides should also look at need to strengthen the on-the-ground manpower in the Indian embassy and consulates. Of course, Australia has done it already as far as they are concerned in India. But now it's the Indian turn because the Indian embassy in Canberra is a little short-staffed, and also I believe that a lot of work is being done by the consulates, but the work has increased over the past few years, and they are spreading themselves very, very thin. I've also, paid attention to the fact that we need consulates in Adelaide and Brisbane at some point. So thought should be given to that. Funds should be set aside. And these things take a long time to materialize. It's not very easy to do that. Then again, we have to strengthen the presence of bodies like CII and FICCI, for instance, because they have a one-person, office in CII, one-person office in the whole of Australia. So obviously, it's very difficult to cover what you want to cover optimally. So therefore, the CII presence has to be increased.
Thanks so much, Anil. I just wanted to, I mean, this appears to be a very strong menu of what is possible. And I just wanted to wrap up with a question or a set of questions, which is that when Prime Minister Modi visited Australia during his first term, it was considered by many to be a historic visit, and not simply because it was a visit by an Indian Prime Minister after almost 30 years. It was considered to be a historic visit for multiple reasons, one of which is that there was an extraordinary outreach that the Prime Minister of India extended towards his counterpart. And the issue of the FTA, for example, did come up. And there was a lot of enthusiasm and a feeling that it would be negotiated and signed very quickly. It's now been almost 6 years since that visit, and we are nowhere near conclusion, which really makes people wonder as to whether there is a follow-up subsequent to historic announcements being made. And to that extent, when you say that organizations like CII or FICCI or the Tourism Office have only one person or two persons looking after Australia, the question that really comes to mind is whether two countries, whether Canberra and New Delhi, actually take each other seriously. And it's not just the governments who need to negotiate and work on this, it's the actual stakeholders, our business and industry. And the resilience with which they perceive each other becomes extremely important. You mentioned also about China. If we look at the two-way trade between India and Australia, it's about $22 billion as per the 2019 figures. But Australia and China is $252 billion. So we're really trying to compare apples and oranges. How strong do you feel is the sentiment in India and in Australia among the business community to actually see a report of this nature realize its true potential? And I give you one example, maybe it's a bad example, but a CEO forum does exist, but it's completely non-functional. So how do we activate this interest between the two countries? Otherwise, the two reports are really going to be on the bookshelf.
Yes, Amit, I think you touched upon some very important points there, and I'll answer you one by one. First of all, the Prime Minister Modi's visit to Australia. I was there with him on that visit. I remember very clearly that we discussed the question of a free trade agreement at that point in time. And I must say that we had some very vigorous follow-up in the 2 years which followed that visit. Vigorous in the sense that things had come to a situation where we were actually looking at 3 or 4 major issues which proved to be obstacles at that time. And they proved to be obstacles because of the domestic constituencies for some in India and for some in Australia. Then we started talking about the RCEP negotiations. And before we came to the RCEP negotiations, Australia realized the mood in India at that point in time to conclude this agreement was just not right, because India had started a review of its free trade agreements with the ASEAN countries at that point in time. And that review was ongoing. And, the feeling was that once the review is over, then after that, the Australian FTA would resume. Now, that never came to pass because quickly things moved, and Australia and India started negotiating together in the RCEP. So, again, the bilateral FTA went on the back burner. Now that India is not part of the RCEP, and specifically this report has identified specific sectors like, for example, things like gems and jewelry, or railways or textiles. Now, all these attract higher duties for Indian companies in Australia, obviously, because there are sources from where Australia can get similar products at competitive rates, even though Indian prices might be cheaper. And despite that, I think exports are increasing in these areas. But how much more can Indian companies do if there's a level playing field? And therefore, looking at it from that perspective, we have a situation where the policymakers in India now will have to seriously look at alternate sources with whom the free trade agreements will have to be opened up. Since India is not part of the major agreement like RCEP, for example, and there's an ongoing review of the existing FTAs as well. But there is a mood change, so to speak, in India, at least to look at that. In Australia, I believe, always looked at expanding its free trade agreements, and that continues till today. So that's why I say that there is this opportunity which has come up. Second issue, you rightly pointed out about the stakeholders. And of them, the biggest stakeholders are the big business, which I also pointed out earlier. Um, Australia-China trade and investments are huge, and they're huge because they grew on the back of commodity exports from Australia into China, but gradually expanded into other fields. And organizations like the Business Council of Australia, which include some really big names in Australia, started engaging more and more with China, and that's why we've come to this mammoth figure. And this trade, how has its own momentum. At the moment, of course, we are going through a phase where the Australian companies are finding it tough to deal with the Chinese. But this is geopolitics again. At some point in time, we will have a situation where there's a thaw. The companies will again start trading and investing, and that situation can change anytime. Regardless of that, I think now there is much more of an interest by the big businesses to look at alternate markets in Australia and alternate sources in Australia. So that's where India fits in. And I'm so glad that I had before this the Peter Varghese report, which actually pointed out that India is a new area, along with Indonesia, I believe, where Australian companies should look at very seriously for expanding their trade and investments. And again, like the Varghese report, this report is also very much technology driven, not so much on trade, because I believe that investments will drive trade, and the innovation side of the relationship will do much better than the trade in terms of figures improving. I think there is a limit to how much India-Australia trade can grow to. We have to be very realistic about this. So we cannot compare what the Australia-China relationship would look like with the India-Australia relationship. But there's a figure that we've identified in this report, and we've said that if businesses and governments put their efforts together, then India has the potential to increase its export of goods and services to Australia. Remember, services is also a very important sector here, from $5 billion to about $15 billion in 2025 and $35 billion in 2035. So 15 billion in 2025 and 35 billion in 2035. And I believe this is a doable and a realistic figure, provided the businesses, get interested in each other much more. Now, you rightly pointed out about the CEOs Forum, and I also said that in my opening remarks, where I believe that the CEOs Forum is not organized properly because there is no conducive body on the Australian side which is driving the CEOs Forum. There's been a dispute for a number of years now, 2.5, 3 years maybe, on which body should actually head it from the Australian side. On the Indian side, we are pretty clear about CII leading this effort. But on the Australian side, there's always been a rethink in DFAT officially, and then even otherwise amongst the business organizations as to who should be really driving it. So unless you have that clarity, you will always have this constant problem. And that is exactly what the report points out, that you've got to sort out the structural problem which exists and really involve the big businesses who are, if they're involved with each other already in trade and investment, those are the right people to drive it, and then gradually others will join and follow.
Thank you very much, Anil. I mean, like you, I believe that India-Australia relations would be a very strong strategic input to the geopolitical and the geostrategic landscape globally. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for this important report. And I do hope that we will see a robust relationship taking shape. Thanks a lot.